There was once a plant that grew in gardens across Europe, quietly thriving beside country homes, along fences, and near barns. Today, many people walk past it without recognizing its significance. It isn't an exotic species or a rare botanical treasure. In fact, it's still surprisingly common. Yet for centuries, this modest herb was regarded as one of the most useful and respected plants a family could cultivate. That plant is tansy. Long before pharmacies, prescription medicines, and modern healthcare became part of daily life, people depended on the natural world for survival. Knowledge about healing plants was carefully passed from one generation to the next. Among these trusted herbs, tansy held a special place. It wasn't admired because it was gentle or pleasant. Instead, it earned respect because of its remarkable strength, practical uses, and the fact that it required careful handling. Unlike many wild plants that appeared on their own, tansy was often planted intentionally. Families believed it served an important role around the home, so it was commonly grown near cottages, livestock shelters, gardens, and monastery grounds throughout much of Europe. Farmers relied on it, herbalists studied it, and ordinary households recognized its value. At the same time, everyone understood one important fact: it was a powerful herb that deserved respect. Visually, tansy hardly appears intimidating. During summer, it produces clusters of bright yellow, button-like flowers that add cheerful color to the landscape. But anyone who handled the plant quickly noticed its unmistakable aroma. Rather than smelling sweet or floral, tansy gives off a strong, bitter medicinal fragrance that immediately distinguishes it from many other garden plants. People also observed something unusual. Insects often stayed away from tansy, and grazing animals frequently ignored it. Long before scientists identified the natural compounds responsible, generations of careful observation convinced people that the plant possessed unique protective qualities. Traditional herbalists never viewed tansy as an everyday herb. It wasn't brewed casually like relaxing teas or used as a gentle household remedy. Instead, it was reserved for specific purposes and prepared according to established traditions. Experimentation was discouraged. Instead, families followed methods that had been refined through centuries of practical experience. Historically, one of tansy's most important purposes involved protection and cleansing, not the modern wellness concepts promoted today, but practical protection against insects, parasites, and infestations that once posed constant challenges for homes, livestock, and food supplies. For that reason, tansy became an important household companion. Fresh bundles were hung inside homes, dried stems were stored with clothing and grain, and leaves were placed around windows, doorways, and sleeping areas. Time after time, people noticed that unwanted insects seemed less likely to linger wherever tansy was present. These practices survived for generations because they consistently appeared to work. Farmers appreciated the plant for many of the same reasons. They understood its strength and treated it carefully. Experienced users believed moderation was essential. Too little often had little effect, while excessive use could create unwanted problems. As a result, tansy was typically reserved for carefully chosen situations rather than everyday use. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of tansy's history is that people recognized its power centuries before modern science could explain it. They had no chemical analyses or laboratory equipment, yet repeated observation taught them an important lesson. This was a plant to be used thoughtfully for a purpose and never without caution. That philosophy distinguished tansy from many gentler medicinal herbs. Over time, society changed dramatically. Scientific medicine advanced, agriculture became increasingly industrialized, and traditional herbal knowledge slowly faded from everyday life. As this transformation occurred, tansy gradually disappeared from common discussion, not necessarily because it lost its usefulness, but because modern systems increasingly favored standardized products that produced identical results every time. Tansy doesn't always behave that way. Its chemical composition can vary depending on climate, soil quality, weather conditions, and the stage of growth at harvest. While this natural variability was accepted by traditional herbalists, it proved much less compatible with modern pharmaceutical standards that depend on consistency and precise measurements. Ironically, the same characteristics that once made tansy valuable also made it difficult to standardize. Another reason the herb faded from popularity is that many people began comparing traditional remedies directly with modern medications. Yet these comparisons often overlook an important difference. Earlier generations weren't trying to decide whether one treatment was scientifically superior. Instead, they asked a much simpler question. Does this plant solve the problem we are facing? For many communities over many centuries, tansy often did. Its use was always selective, cautious, and guided by experience rather than guesswork. Because of that, it maintained a respected place within traditional herbal practices. Safety concerns also played a major role in its decline. Historical herbalists repeatedly warned that tansy was not suitable for everyone. It was generally avoided during pregnancy, not recommended for children, and never intended for prolonged or excessive use. Understanding these limitations was considered just as important as understanding its benefits. As fewer people inherited this traditional knowledge, tansy's reputation gradually shifted. Rather than being remembered as a powerful herb requiring careful handling, it increasingly became known simply as a dangerous plant. Once a reputation like that develops, many people stop talking about the plant altogether instead of explaining its complexities. History, however, paints a much richer picture. Old herbal texts frequently mention tansy alongside many medicinal plants that remain popular today. It was never an obscure or forgotten species known only to specialists. Throughout much of Europe, it was a familiar part of everyday life. What made it unique was the respect and caution that always accompanied its use. Modern living has also removed many of the situations where tansy once proved especially valuable. Improved sanitation, safer food storage, modern veterinary medicine, and advances in healthcare have eliminated many of the everyday challenges earlier generations faced. As those problems became less common, some of the plants used to address them naturally faded from public attention. Yet tansy itself never vanished. It remains an exceptionally hardy perennial, capable of thriving where many other plants struggle. It tolerates drought, cold winters, poor soils, and neglect while resisting numerous pests and diseases. In some areas, it grows so vigorously that gardeners must actively prevent it from spreading too aggressively. Today, people cultivate tansy for different reasons. Some include it in historical gardens, others value it for companion planting, while many gardeners appreciate its ability to discourage certain insects naturally. Interestingly, modern growers continue noticing many of the same patterns their ancestors observed centuries ago. Many insects avoid it. Most grazing animals leave it untouched. Nearby plants sometimes experience fewer pest issues. These recurring observations continue to spark interest among gardeners and researchers alike. Ultimately, tansy's historical importance was never based on superstition or folklore alone. It was built upon generations of practical experience. Farmers, healers, and families carefully observed how the plant behaved, learned where it proved helpful, recognized its limitations, and understood when caution was essential. Perhaps that's the greatest lesson tansy still teaches today. Traditional herbal knowledge rarely treated powerful plants casually. Effectiveness and responsibility were always expected to go hand in hand. Earlier generations understood that a plant could be both valuable and potentially risky at the same time. Modern thinking often prefers simple categories. Something is either completely safe or completely dangerous. Tansy doesn't fit comfortably into either label. Instead, it reminds us that some of nature's most powerful plants demand knowledge, respect, and thoughtful use. So why has tansy largely disappeared from everyday conversation? Perhaps because it refuses to fit into simple explanations. It cannot be reduced to catchy headlines or easy conclusions. It requires context, careful understanding, and a willingness to appreciate complexity. For historians, herbal enthusiasts, and gardeners interested in traditional knowledge, tansy continues to hold a quiet but meaningful place. Not because it is magical, not because it is mysterious, but because it reflects centuries of practical wisdom that once helped ordinary people solve real problems. And perhaps that's why this remarkable plant continues to fascinate people today. It reminds us that many familiar plants growing quietly around us carry stories far older than we often realize. Stories shaped by observation, survival, experience, and generations of accumulated knowledge. 2. Wormwood. If tansy became famous for its intense strength and the caution it demanded, wormwood earned respect for an entirely different reason. Instead of producing quick, dramatic effects, wormwood was associated with steady, long-term use. It became a symbol of patience, consistency, and careful herbal practice rather than immediate action. For countless generations, wormwood was almost synonymous with bitterness. Its unmistakably sharp flavor became so well known that people often used its name whenever they wanted to describe something extremely bitter. Even in communities where the herb was no longer commonly used, its reputation for bitterness remained part of local language and tradition. Unlike tansy, which was typically reserved for specific situations and handled with considerable care, wormwood found a broader place within traditional herbal systems. It was seldom used on its own. Herbalists frequently blended it with other plants, adjusting recipes according to local customs, individual needs, and accumulated experience. Small doses, regular observation, and gradual adjustments became central to its traditional role. This adaptability helped wormwood spread across numerous cultures. It was cultivated in monastery gardens, grown in household herb plots, and collected from wild landscapes throughout Europe and beyond. Merchants transported dried wormwood along trade routes, allowing knowledge about the plant to travel across borders and through generations. Where tansy often appeared during short periods of focused use, wormwood became part of long-standing herbal traditions. Its value came not from urgency but from consistency. As herbal medicine became increasingly organized, wormwood fit naturally into more structured systems of care. Herbs that could be observed over time, modified gradually and carefully documented, were easier to incorporate into evolving medical practices. Wormwood's flexible nature made it especially suitable for this approach. Traditional healers appreciated that flexibility. Preparations could be strengthened or weakened as needed, and treatments could evolve based on experience and observation rather than remaining fixed. Tansy allowed far less room for adjustment. For this reason, wormwood was often viewed as the beginning of a treatment rather than the final answer. Its strength did not come from dramatic intensity, but from its ability to support gradual progress while allowing careful observation along the way. In many traditional healing systems, that adaptability was considered one of its greatest advantages. Wormwood was rarely seen as the destination. More often, it represented the first step on the journey. 3. Black walnut. Black walnut earned its reputation through direct experience rather than legend alone. Anyone who handled its green outer hulls quickly discovered their remarkable ability to stain almost anything they touched. Hands, clothing, baskets, wooden tools, and work surfaces could all become marked by the deep, dark pigments, sometimes for weeks. The tree never seemed subtle, its presence was obvious, and it always left evidence behind. Over time, those stubborn stains became symbolic. Many people believed that if a plant could leave such lasting marks on wood, fabric, and skin, it likely possessed equally powerful qualities hidden beneath the surface. Whether those assumptions reflected scientific reality mattered less than the observations that shaped centuries of traditional belief. Unlike tansy, whose reputation centered on immediate strength, black walnut became associated with persistence and endurance. Rather than producing rapid effects, it was believed to work slowly and steadily. If tansy resembled a sudden lightning strike, black walnut was often compared to a river, patiently shaping its surroundings little by little over many years. This perception influenced how people treated the plant. Many herbal traditions valued black walnut precisely because it seemed gradual rather than abrupt. Slow change gave practitioners time to observe, evaluate, and respond. At the same time, its lingering nature encouraged caution. Anything believed to remain active for extended periods naturally inspired both confidence and respect. Black walnut was never considered a casual remedy. It required patience. Once introduced into traditional herbal practice, it carried a reputation for leaving a lasting influence. Unlike wormwood, which could be modified or discontinued with relative ease, black walnut was often thought to continue exerting its presence long after initial use. That enduring quality became one of the reasons it commanded so much respect. It was also one of the reasons people approached it carefully. The comparison between tansy and black walnut illustrates an important lesson found throughout traditional herbal knowledge. Power was never measured only by intensity. Lasting influence mattered just as much. A violent storm can arrive without warning and capture everyone's attention. Yet a slow-moving river eventually reshapes mountains. Both are powerful. One acts suddenly before disappearing, the other works quietly, patiently, and often leaves a much deeper legacy. 4. Garlic. At first glance, garlic hardly seems like a plant that belongs alongside legendary medicinal herbs. It lacks dramatic flowers, unusual appearances, or mysterious stories. Yet throughout history, few plants have been woven more deeply into everyday human life. Unlike tansy, which occupied a specialized role in herbal traditions, or wormwood, which required careful preparation, garlic became something entirely different. It crossed the boundaries between food and medicine with remarkable ease. It flavored meals, preserved food, supported traditional health practices, carried symbolic meaning, and even played roles in cultural beliefs and spiritual customs. Its greatest strength was not extraordinary power, it was extraordinary consistency. Garlic appeared on tables every day. Families planted it season after season without hesitation. Harvesting garlic became as routine as gathering any other staple crop. Unlike herbs surrounded by detailed warnings and complicated instructions, garlic naturally blended into ordinary life. Compared with tansy, garlic felt gentle and familiar. Compared with wormwood, it seemed comforting and dependable. Compared with black walnut, it was approachable and forgiving. Its influence wasn't based on dramatic moments, but on steady, repeated use over many years. Traditional cultures understood an idea that modern life sometimes overlooks. Lasting results don't always come from powerful actions. Often, consistent habits create the greatest impact. Garlic reflected that philosophy perfectly. It didn't demand attention. It didn't require elaborate preparation. It simply became part of everyday living. Perhaps that explains why garlic remained such a permanent feature of human civilization, while many other medicinal plants slowly disappeared from common household use. Tansy required knowledge and restraint. Wormwood required patience and careful observation. Black walnut rewarded long-term commitment. Garlic asked for something much easier. It simply asked to be included in daily life. And by quietly remaining present, it influenced countless generations. Although garlic and tansy were both respected in traditional medicine, they represented two very different philosophies. Tansy was reserved for specific moments when decisive action was needed. Garlic, on the other hand, demonstrated the quiet power of everyday habits. That simple difference may explain why garlic continues to fill kitchens across the world, while many once famous medicinal herbs have largely faded from everyday memory. 5. Rue. Among the many herbs that shaped traditional healing practices, rue probably shared more in common with tansy than almost any other plant. Not because the two herbs served identical purposes, but because both inspired the same careful mindset. Neither was treated casually, and both were approached with respect rather than familiarity. Rue was never considered just another ornamental herb. From the day it was planted, it was believed to serve a meaningful purpose. People rarely cultivated it simply for its appearance or productivity. Instead, it occupied a unique place within traditional gardens, where its significance extended far beyond its physical characteristics. Historically, rue was often planted beside gates, entrances, pathways, and garden borders. These locations were not chosen by accident. They represented places of transition, where one space ended and another began. In many traditional cultures, rue became associated with mindfulness, awareness, and paying close attention to one's surroundings. If tansy symbolized decisive action, rue symbolized careful observation. Many herbal traditions connected rue with heightened awareness. This wasn't limited to eyesight alone, but referred to recognizing subtle changes, patterns, and imbalances before they became obvious. People believed rue encouraged patience, reflection, and thoughtful decision-making. In several cultures, it appeared during important ceremonies, moments of transition, and significant life events. Rather than creating change itself, rue was thought to help people recognize that change was already underway. That idea clearly distinguished it from tansy. Tansy usually entered the story after a problem had already revealed itself. Rue belonged to an earlier stage. Symbolically, rue reminded people to pay attention. Tansy reminded them that the time for action had arrived. Because of these different roles, traditional herbalists rarely viewed the two plants as interchangeable. Experienced gardeners and healers understood that combining powerful herbs without careful consideration could create unnecessary complications. For them, true wisdom was never about collecting the strongest plants. It was about understanding when and where each plant belonged. Rue had its own purpose. Tansy had its own purpose. Even the way the plants grew seemed to reinforce these ideas. Rue develops slowly and steadily. As it matures, it forms a compact, woody shrub that remains firmly rooted where it was planted. It doesn't aggressively spread across the garden. Instead, its steady growth reflects patience, permanence, and deliberate development. Tansy follows a completely different strategy. It spreads enthusiastically through underground growth, quickly expanding into available space and establishing itself wherever conditions allow. Its behavior reflects movement, energy, and rapid response. Traditional gardeners often believed these growth habits carried symbolic meaning. Plants were never viewed simply as individual species growing in isolation. Their location, behavior, neighboring plants, and relationships within the garden all contributed to the lessons people associated with them. Modern discussions rarely approach herbs this way. Today, plants are usually studied individually, with attention focused on their chemical compounds or practical uses. Historically, however, people often understood plants through their relationships with one another. A plant's importance depended not only on what it was, but also on where it grew, what surrounded it, and the role it played within the larger landscape. Seen from that perspective, rue and tansy were never rivals or opposites. Instead, they complemented one another like two guardians, standing at different points along the same path. Rue encouraged awareness before the boundary was crossed. Tansy represented action once that boundary had already been crossed. Together, they reflected a timeless lesson found throughout many traditional cultures, that wisdom begins by paying attention. But there are moments when observation alone is no longer enough, and decisive action becomes necessary.